not on live yet.
Are you on YouTube or the AV capture?
I'm on YouTube.
YouTube is live for me.
Now I'll close it and open again. Keeps telling me waiting for Franklin County.
Those of you on the line, Jen said she can hear. Can everybody else see the live stream?
This is Matt, and I can see the live stream right now.
This is Sean. I can see the live stream as well.
This is Brad. I can see the live stream and I can.
I got some help here. Hopefully we can. There we go. Looks like we got it. Thanks. Thank you. So it is. I got 9:03, and we're here for our regular Tuesday morning meeting. We have Commissioner Didier in the conference or in the commission room. Commissioner Peck and Cook are remote. And we'll call this to order with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one
nation under God, indivisible,
with liberty and
justice for all. But the next item is a contract with the CARES discussion. But unfortunately, because of the governor's proclamation, we cannot meet together in person. We cannot make any decisions or sign any contracts with the commissioner in person on the meeting.
Well, I just talked to Whitman County, and their chairman's in the meeting room, so how are they making any decisions? And if we're going to play this game of complete domination by a governor who's out of control, if we don't stand up, who is? How does he have control of our local government and our decisions for the people that elected us? And we're giving this proclamation, which is, as I looked it up on my phone, is nothing more than an announcement. A proclamation is an official declaration issued by a person of authority to make certain announcements known, not enforced. He made it known. I'm not following his proclamation. Now, I understand that this Department of Commerce for CARES Act discussion is just discussion. There's no action going to be taken today, so we wouldn't be in violation here to discuss this, according to our great governor's proclamation.
We have a resolution to, upon approval.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, a discussion by a Board of Commissioners in an open meeting is an action under state law.
So with that case, well, I don't want to, but we're gonna have to at least go into recess until we get this figured out, because we cannot make a decision.
So we're going to take Commissioner's Peck word for a discussion is an action? I thought an action was a motion and a second and a movement to make something happen. That's an action. A discussion is not an action. He is not the chairman, Bob. You are.
The discussion is leading to an action.
But not taken today. It's just a discussion.
There's a resolution attached to.
Mr. Chairman, we've got legal counsel on the line. Why don't we ask them?
This is Sean Sant. Essentially, with the board meeting in a quorum setting, that constitutes any action or participation as under the Open Meetings Act. And any action under the Open Meetings Act has been addressed by Governor Executive Order, and also that is enforceable. It's not just a guidance or suggestion. Those executive orders are enforceable as the legislature identified in RCW 4306220, parent 5. So this would be the same context of violating the Open Meetings Act executive order would be the same context of anyone deciding that they are going to open their business in violation of the other executive orders that was restricted. It's the same kind of statutory language. It's the same statutory guidance that was granted to the governor's authority. And I agree with you, Commissioner Didier. I don't have to like it. I don't have to acknowledge or agree with all the governor's decisions, but that unfortunately has fallen to the executive officer or the chief executive officer of the state or the governor. Much, I guess, in similar fashion, when the president of the United States has declared a national emergency with the COVID-19 crisis, that has enabled the flow of the CARES Act money to fund through the states, to the counties, to local governments. And to my knowledge, even at the national level, a national emergency exists. That executive order still exists in place. So that further supports the idea that this is an emergency. The governor is simply acting as an extension in a very localized fashion to the state of Washington and identified a state of emergency within the state of Washington. So long as a state of emergency exists, the governor has very broad authorities as given to him by the people. And when I say by the people, that means through the legislative body. Our state constitution doesn't identify all of the responsibilities that fall upon the governor. It essentially delegates that to the legislature to determine what kind of responsibility. And at this present time, my reading of our state legislative statutory language grants the governor during states of emergency very broad discretion for actions and limitations. Some of those were restricted last year. I think one of the more notable changes were the removal of a firearm possession in public during states of emergency. That provision was removed, but also the legislature put in place a provision that limited certain extensions within 30 days. And that is this extension relating to Open Meetings Act limitations and public meeting sizes and the fact that members of the public cannot participate in these meetings unless you are in phase 3. That Four Corners letter was extended by the legislature, and that actually, the leadership of the legislature, and that actually expires tonight at midnight, essentially at 11:59. It is anticipated that the legislature is going to make a modification to that. The leadership, the Four Corners, will modify that language to further address what counties, including the majority of our state who are now moving into phase 3 or are already in phase 3, that likely letter will extend and modify the current language to be able to address how open meetings can continue when a county is in phase 3. So again, while I recognize it's frustrating and whatnot, that is the law. And my reading of the law is that the restrictions on the open meetings is no different than the restrictions that have been onerous on businesses as well. But unfortunately, if businesses want to comply with the law and don't want to risk possible prosecution under the criminal provisions of the statute I read previously, but in addition, avoid any kind of regulatory enforcement by Department of Revenue, Department of Labor and Industries, or the health department, then they need to comply with those kind of provisions as well. So anyway,
So Sean, I got a question for you. Sean Davis, who is part of our Washington State Emergency Operations Center, sent us a letter. Hello all. On June 25th, local coordination call. Multiple counties had questions about 2 items. If there are conflicts in guidance, which order supersedes? When the governor's order expires July 1st, does the Open Meetings Act take precedence, or does phase 3 guidance take precedence? So it's already expired.
And just to clarify, Commissioner Didier, that's an excellent question. When that letter was drafted, it wasn't until July 1st that the Four Corners or the legislative leadership extended it very briefly. The leadership extended this July 1st date to July 7th on a very brief timeline because they wanted to make sure that they had input with the governor's office on providing for the greater counties that would be affected by the different phase programs. So that letter, I agree, that was timely at the time it was drafted and written because that restriction did expire July 1st, but that has been extended very briefly, and that expires tonight at 11:59 p.m. So as of now, that same provision essentially that would have expired July 1st, that is the current state of the law until tonight at 11:59.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would say we suspend this meeting until tomorrow, and I'll make myself available because I feel it is my duty to my constituents to be in this room discussing these matters. If a couple hundred people, 300-400 people can go to Walmart and they can roam around that store, we can certainly have a meeting in the meeting room without this fear of this COVID plandemic. And that is what we have, a plandemic. We've had 600 and some odd new cases over the weekend and 2 deaths. Both people were in their 80s. God rest their souls. But I am not going to let this governor hold us under his thumb until the election, because there will not be a meeting until after the election. And I, for one, will not allow him to take our government and put it underneath his knee and choke us out.
What, for instance, this resolution 2020-146, what's the timely on that?
It's timely in the sense that that is simply our agreement with the State Department of Commerce. They are holding the funds that were provided by the federal government to the states, which were subsequently to go to the local governments. It's a contract to allow us to begin seeking reimbursements from the CARES Act funding to distribute in a manner that's yet to be decided, whether that's assistance to small businesses, whether that's additional COVID expenses from the Department of Health, from the county, other entities that we have financial obligations to. This it's time sensitive in that the longer we wait, the longer it takes to get those reimbursements in to get the funds out to the people that need them.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mr. Sant. I just wanted to inquire, there was a legal question inquired of me for my legal opinion as to the legal nature of meeting under the Open Meetings Act under the current executive order. Did the board decide, it sounded like there was a motion to adjourn temporarily to be in compliance. I just wanted to get clarification if you need any other additional legal input from me. before proceeding. I just wanted to make sure that the board had clarification on that issue before continuing.
Well, you know, if it did,
Chairman.
yes.
I just have a couple of observations, question for our legal counsel. You know, moving the meeting to tomorrow, one, we'd have to re-advertise the meeting. Two, people who are accustomed to our meetings being on Tuesday morning who may be listening in would be further inconvenienced. Three, we have a legal platform for holding the meeting. If the idea is that we're going to reschedule the meeting to sometime in the future when the law may be more amenable, I think that's inappropriate, and would point out that it may very well be that before 11:59 p.m. tonight, the current law gets extended once more, or maybe several times more. So I think the appropriate thing is to hold the meeting. I am concerned that if we are in violation of the law, and I believe we are, and we've discussed it here publicly, presumably any of the actions taken by this board in this meeting would be subject to challenge by anyone who wanted to point out that we ourselves acknowledge that it's an unlawful meeting. Mr. Sant, would you respond to that, please?
Well, that's certainly a question. If there's a violation of the Open Meetings Act, essentially then any business that takes place during that meeting can be called. More concernedly, I provided a resource to all, and I believe I CC'd Keith Johnson on it, that it just indicates that if we condone violating the executive order, despite our various theories of how that might be an overreach of power by the governor or whatnot, that could all subject us into, if actions are taken knowingly or under the advice of legal guidance that this is contrary to what the law allows under the current state of affairs, then potentially there can be a commission of malfeasance or misfeasance. And that's where I would be a little bit more concerned about, because, you know, that would potentially jeopardize your ability to be in office if you were in fact charged and convicted with that kind of offense under that prong of that information that I provided to the board earlier. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of concerns that come about when we've had discussion, we've been provided information regarding the Open Meetings Act. I would certainly encourage the board to continue with the county business in a lawful manner. I recognize that that's inconvenient, but I don't see there being a disingenuous ability to serve the public, even if we have to do telephonic participation in meetings. We have the majority of the board participating telephonically. I don't think that there's any diminishing value of the board members' individual input participating telephonically, in much of the same manner that members of the public, if they were also not allowed to be present, they participate in the same forum, and they get to participate equally as its leaders of the local county jurisdiction. So essentially you have full participation in government activities compliant with the Open Meetings Act, and you have the public that is able to call in and fully participate and engage with their elected officials. So my recommendation would be just simply to follow the law. And I recognize, I mean, I have to comply with the law just like anybody else. And I would be, if I didn't give the board this kind of advice and counsel, I think I would be doing a disservice as well.
Sean, what's the statute of limitations on an illegal meeting?
Well, if it's a violation of the order here, it's a gross misdemeanor, so you would have a 2-year statute of limitations.
I would like you to look back into the meeting when the commissioner salaries were raised and they moved it to election day without the notice to the public. And if that is so, I'd like that meeting to be null and void, and the salary increases will be diminished down to where they were at before they were raised.
We could certainly look at that, Commissioner Didier.
Yes, that meeting was moved to election day and it was not given notice to the public.
We could certainly look at that.
That still leads us to today.
Yes, it does. Now, how does Whitman County get away with the chairman in the room with the clerk and they're having their meeting, but I can't be here social distanced with my doctor's note in this meeting? What is the difference between Whitman County and Franklin County? That's what I want to know. How are they not being voided either?
I can't speak for any other county, Commissioner Didier. I'm trying to give advice, which.
I just called them. They're in their meeting right now with the chairman in the room.
If other people want to violate the law, that's their choice. I don't know if they're in a different phase than we are. We're in phase 1.5 or a modified version of that. And I know that my reading of our allowances under the OPMA, under the current executive order, would prohibit the public meetings. And so my guidance is to the board here in Franklin County. And I mean, my oath of office was that I would support and uphold the Constitution as well as the laws of the state of Washington. And so I can't address what other counties are doing. I could only speak to, I'm going to give the board the legal advice that I've been elected to provide, and I'll defer to the board on what actions they want to take accordingly.
Well, at this
Chairman,
point,
I just note that Whitman County is in phase 3, I believe.
so there's no comparison. It's not apples and apples.
Well, I guess for the good of the public and the good of the CARES Act money, I am going to refer to my room. But Sean, I want an answer to that movement of that meeting by the end of the week. Is that okay?
I'll try to do the best I can with.
Sean, I don't want to hear the best you can. It isn't that hard for you to look up. I would like that by the end of the week, please. Thank you.
We'll recess for 15 minutes and give Commissioner Didier a chance to fire up downstairs.
Mr. Cook, I'm going to stay on the phone and I'll just listen for when we reconvene.
I also will stay on the phone.
Am I on my computer or am I on my phone or what?
On your phone, I'll have Shirley help you set it up.
Okay, we're back from recess.
All right, actually, we're coming out of recess. We were never in executive session. That just happened to be the only placard that was available rapidly. So, again, we were not in executive session, just recess. So, I guess roll call, Commissioner Peck,
Yes, I'm here.
Commissioner Didier,
Yes, I'm here.
thank you. I appreciate your willingness to apply with the OPMA. We can carry on the legal meeting. With that, we'll go right into the rest of the discussion with the CARES Act. Please, Keith.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you for consideration, discussion, and hopefully approval is a interagency agreement with the State Department of Commerce related to coronavirus relief fund for local governments. This is the CARES Act funding that the Congress passed back in, I believe it was in March, to provide funds for local governments to help offset some of the costs related to the COVID pandemic. There are some limitations that are included in the agreement about how we use the money, but they are fairly broad limitations in terms of strings attached to the funding. We've had some brief discussions in our prior board meetings about our intended use for these funds to assist local business community that have been economically impacted. We will have some discussion about how much of additional funding would go to the Benton Franklin Health District for the additional testing and tracing efforts that they have engaged in. Recognize that there is opportunity for debate and discussion about how these funds can and will be used. But the purpose of today's discussion is not to debate where those funds go, but simply to have this agreement in place with the Department of Commerce so that once we do decide how to apply the funds, we can seek reimbursement from the Department of Commerce to provide those funds to the people that are needing it. So with that, I will let you know it's a standard agreement. It's the same contract that applies to all counties in the state of Washington. It was not necessarily a negotiated contract in the context of its terms, but it is a formal recognition and documentation for both federal and state audit purposes and contracting purposes that we have this agreement in place. It has been reviewed by county's legal counsel, and without any objection from them, we are ready to move forward with your discussion and approval.
Discussion, commissioners.
Commissioner Cook, the only observation I'd make is that we need to be aware of paragraph 7, even though the contract runs through the end of the year, the time window under which we can commit these funds and have to account for them has a few different dates in it. I think the last of which is November 15th, if I recall. Doesn't present a concern about approving it. It's just that if we've got expenditures, we need to do those sooner rather than later, as the window does close before the end of the year, it appears under paragraph 7.
Yeah. I think that's been a concern right along from this whole organization, as far as Keith last week told us he was waiting for a contract. I think everybody that I have heard from and been in meetings with have had the same concern, waiting for a contract, but starting to edge up on towards a sunset. So sooner the better.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
this is Commissioner Didier. On the face sheet of this, it has contract amount $5,207,400. But on our Franklin County Board of Commissioners 2020-146 financial impact is $5,700,400. We have two different amounts here.
Yeah, that 5,207,400 is under the resolution. That other one is just a agenda summary report.
Well, this is from the Washington State Department of Commerce. Line item number 9 from the Treasury.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I don't have the ASR in front of me, but it is certainly possible that there was a translation error. Commissioner Didier is correct on the face sheet of the contract. It is $5,207,400, and that is properly reflected in the resolution. I do see now a copy of the ASR, which it does have the wrong impact. The ASR is not stated the amount correctly.
And Mr. Chairman, I would also like to add that I've looked up the Preserving Jobs for American Industry, and I've looked up the White House briefing and the remarks from the president. He certainly wants to see this money going to the workers and the small businesses, as I do. I think the health department with the $2.3 million that they're getting from the state is going to be adequate enough. I think that this money needs to go to the small businesses in Franklin County that are suffering, that we can hopefully keep them alive so they can get through this pandemic that we're participating in with this tyrant governor.
So noted. So, further discussion? Now I would entertain a motion for Franklin County Resolution 2020-146, adopting the interagency agreement with the State of Washington Department of Commerce related to the Coronavirus Relief Fund for local governments.
Mr. Chairman, move for approval of Resolution 2020-146 as presented.
I second.
Okay, further discussion? Not all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. That, Keith, what else we got there? Anything?
No, not on official business there. I don't have any callers on the line yet for public comment either.
Okay. With that, we'll move into pay the bills.
Well, Mr. Chairman, there are no payroll rosters this morning. We do have a warrant register. This is fund expenditures. Move for approval of fund expenditures as presented in the total amount of $55,203.93. And note that this has been reviewed and signed off by the county administrator and 2 members of the auditor's office.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, that'll move us to the consent agenda 1 through 4.
Sorry, I had my mute on. Mr. Chairman, move for approval of consent agenda as presented, 4 items.
Second, with discussion on number 4.
Okay, discussion?
Yes, and this has to do with Matt. Matt, this is the work that we did. Correct me if I'm wrong, PSC was awarded the construction contract for $124,110.
Yes, that's correct.
And were these for the reflectors up Glade and Road 68?
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to make sure. Now, when we voted on this, it was $370,000. Was that also included in the rumble strips that were put out there on Glade Road up at South Landing?
Well, this specific one was a standalone project. The flexible guidepost under that, so what was awarded was to PSC for that 124, 110. So yeah, we have received lots of safety dollars, and yeah, we've included in that were the rumble strips that you see on Glade, and so yeah, there's quite a few different portions of this safety money.
Okay, well, it's sad to say that those reflector strips, I think they're just about all gone by now. So it's, we haven't even hit the potato digging season, and the rest will be gone at that time. I know this is grant money, and I know we're trying to make our roads safe, but we have to be more wise with the taxpayers' money. When we got a narrow road, it's not an all-weather road. This is truly a waste of taxpayers' money, because it is just, they're destroyed right now, and it's pretty disheartening to see that.
Yeah, we went out there and took a good look at that area on Glade, and what we saw was the wheel line of a tractor going right down the line of reflectors. So they basically just drove it right down the line and took them all out. So unfortunately, there's not much we can do with that when they literally drive right down,
Well, Matt, if they're
right down the line of them.
If they're packing a 20-foot wide piece of equipment, they have to get over on the side of the road. And honestly, I got to be honest with you, it wasn't just one tractor. Every day there was more casualties. I mean, I was out there, I'm driving these roads, I watched it, and they kept disappearing, not all at one time, but
Yeah.
it was day after day after day. And you got to realize that the equipment is bigger, and it is, you got to get out of the way of the oncoming traffic, or somebody's going to get killed. So this was not a wise move by us on a road that's not all weather.
All right, further discussion? If not, ask for motion to, well, we got a motion and a second. All in favor of the consent agenda 1 through 4?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So, thank you. Keith, the office business.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First item is a letter that you're being asked to consider signing. This, I realize, was not on the earlier agenda. I just got it late last night, but it is a little bit time sensitive in that Representative Mary Dye and Representative Newhouse have coordinated with regional commissioners and others to send a letter to the secretaries Esper, Bernhardt, and Purdue of the federal government to support completion of the Columbia Basin project. As you will no doubt remember, the project started a number of years ago, was only partially completed. It's been lingering many years as a result of not having funding. Under President Trump's effort to get economic activity going and to have some infrastructure projects started in the country. There is renewed energy and effort in Washington, D.C. to support completion and funding of the rest of the project. And so we are being asked, let's say we, Franklin County is being asked through its commissioners to support this letter to the Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Interior, and Secretary of Defense. I provided you earlier this morning an emailed copy of that letter and asked for your signature on it today.
Discussion. I think it's something we've been after for a long time, and hopefully this letter signed by the 4 counties commissioners, hopefully it will get some traction.
I would just ask for a simple motion to approve commissioners signing the letter.
Mr. Chairman, I can support the letter as well. So I've moved to approve board signing of the letter. Commissioners can sign either in person or by electronic signature provided by the clerk to the clerk of the board. I second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith.
Next item I want to make sure you're aware of is continuing discussions with the Takaha Youth Hockey Program. We've had some discussion about their desire to amend their lease term in exchange for a reduced rental rate over 2 years, and they would take on the responsibility of repairing and maintaining the ice making equipment at the arena. We understand that there were some questions about ownership of real property. That is not our intent, nor do I believe it's their intent to convey any kind of a real property interest, but simply to amend the terms of the contract so that they can better manage their own assets, but also have a more dependable ice making system that they can rely on for the next period of time. So certainly open to questions or discussion, but we think we can address that simply through an amendment to the lease terms.
So, Mr. Chairman, I've heard a couple of different variations on this discussion about what the consideration is for each of the parties. The consideration for the county appears that we no longer have the responsibility and related costs of maintaining the ice making equipment. And it appears that consideration on the part of Takaha is that they get the benefit of a longer term agreement and certainty about the availability of the facility and the ice. I'm not inclined to further reduce their lease rate on the basis that we recently had a major reduction in their lease rate. And I know that the consideration in that case involved maintaining Zambonis and other equipment, but I think the lease rate is more than reasonable now. And I think the consideration on the two sides ought to be as I've already described.
Mr. Chairman, Keith, I think you need to clarify there's not a further reduction. It is just not an increase. There was a $10,000 increase for this coming year and the year after that. It's a 2-year lease. We remain at $80,000 for the next 2 years, the same lease money we got this year. They take on full responsibility of replacing 3 compressors, drying the system down, putting Freon in the system, and maintaining the system. That's well over $20,000 value. We'll reclaim that $10,000 that we were going to get an increase and more for this movement and this rental.
So, Mr. Chairman, it appears that Mr. Didier has information that I don't, which is perfectly fine. I was not aware that part of their commitment was to replace these components. I was given to believe that it was to maintain them, and replacement would only be if there was a catastrophic failure, which does have benefit to us. But if they are committing to replace them at the start, that might color my thinking on it. And once an agreement is in place that has an escalating lease amount, to remove those escalations is in fact a reduction in the lease value for the contract. But it does sound like we need to all have the benefit of the same information. So Keith, if you could please re-summarize that with attention to detail on what exactly the consideration is on the two sides, I would be grateful.
Sure. The agreement from Takaha is that they would maintain and replace components if needed. So you have that correct. The change in the lease rates is, I believe, as Commissioner Didier explained it, that they would stay at the current rate of $80,000 instead of the escalated rate next year of $90,000. So they would receive a financial benefit as a result of this change, but in exchange for the security of reliable ice.
And do you, and Mr. French, speaking to you, Keith, do you and Mr. French have a recommendation as to how you think the board ought to move on this, as given that you've likely been closer to these discussions than I have? And second to that, the lease term is how long and remains unchanged? That's a question.
Yeah, the lease term would remain unchanged. It goes through a 2-year period that's consistent with the cycle of their electing of officers. My recommendation would be simply to amend the lease terms accordingly under Mr. French's signature. That would not be particularly unusual to amend a lease for facilities at the HAPO Center. Because we already have a lease in place, a contract in place, I don't know that it's necessary to formally bring it back before the board for signature and approval. But I think it's important that you understand what it is we're negotiating and what the consequences of that are.
Yes, of course. So it is a two-year lease that has already begun. Would this amendment restart the clock on that 2-year lease, or would it be the current term would continue to run, and when does it expire?
The current term would run, I would have to get clarification. I believe it runs through spring of 2022.
Okay.
It's tied to their hockey season, so it'll be this season and next season. They're in the middle of their season now.
Mr. Chairman, based on the information that's been provided, I can support the request and concur with letting the HAPO Center manager, under the supervision of the county administrator, move forward with that amendment. If there's any need for board action on it, we can seek that input from our legal counsel.
I can concur with that. Do we have consensus, Commissioner Didier?
Yes.
Right, I think you have what you need, Keith.
I do. Thank you very much. That's all the office business I believe I have today, and I don't see any calls on the public line.
All right. So, anything else for the good of the board today? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you for the consideration.
Thank you all.
Thank you.